Hello.
1 second. Speaker.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now. I can hear you fine. You're not saying anything. Can you hear me? Why are you doing that weird face? Why is your face like that?
Sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Right, okay, I think that's
Have
us.
you sorted it now?
Uh-huh.
I'm using James's new fancy microphone.
Oh yeah, you've got a dildo.
I've got a dildo, and I'm not afraid to use it.
Uh yeah, so what's on the agenda?
I don't know what we talk about. We'll have to talk about Sturgeon and the resignation, I guess. I don't know what else.
All right, let's just jump right into it. There's loads to talk
Okay.
about.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to ConterCast. My name is Kat Boyd, and I am joined with my lovely co-host David Jameson, and we are back on our bullshit.
How's it going? Long time no see.
Well,
Is it really 3 months since our last one? I saw you tweet that.
I think it's about 3 months. I think the last one I did, the baby was 3 year, 3 years, 3 months old, and now she's 6 months old. So, I mean, obviously, I date everything in baby now.
Yeah. Um, yes, the baby sort of egg timer. She's a wee unit now.
Aye,
It's good.
aye, she's solid. She's solid. She's
Uh,
great.
so in those 3 months, I mean, nothing really.
Quite a lot of shit has happened again, right?
Yeah.
Because we're living in a lifetime of politics.
Mm,
Like, do you know what I mean? Like this whole like history is back, yada yada, right? But it's actually just really stupid politics all the time now.
mm.
Like the next current thing. Like I mean, that's what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis is like, what is the next stupid thing going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with some trepidation. I'm anticipating the collision of the current thing, Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, into next week, which is, of course, the anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, I mean,
There's going to be an almighty collision of things.
of stupid things, of like the
Um,
current thing and the most idiotic war. Do you know what I
mm,
mean? Like just and the left's complete failure to organize a proper position against it, to argue against it effectively, complete capitulation by major parts of the left. To the extent that the right in America are leading the anti-war coalition, and
mm,
coalition building against the war in Ukraine. Yeah, with Sturgeon's resignation, the current thing and the most idiotic thing will collide into I don't know, just a sort of like firework display of idiocy.
could you maybe turn down your volume a little bit on the dildo?
I don't know how to do that.
You should have a little volume nozzle at the front.
I mean, uh, hold on, what's it say? Why am I being really loud?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a volume. Oh, wait.
Is it the bat eyes of the other side?
It's quite low already. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that better?
I'll work out in the edit. Don't worry about it.
Um, just hold on, I'll see. I mean, are you going to edit this bit out?
Yeah. Maybe just put a bit of distance between yourself and it. I think they say you should do like that.
Hello? Oh, I mean, it seems fine.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Oh, wait, right, hold on. No, that's right. I'm speaking at a fine volume.
Okay. Okay. Um, don't worry. It's probably I can't use my laptop properly. Uh,
Hold on. Right, I fixed it.
okay. Um, so yes, there's going to be a collision of things into next week. We're also only just out of the kind of the pile up around the GRR.
Oh,
I mean, so yeah, I mean the things are coming fast, thick and fast.
I mean, I just want like someone to stop the stupid things. Like, I need a break from the stupid things. That's why there hasn't been a ConterCast. Because I'm like, I literally like, people have kids and then they get like into politics because they're like, oh, I need to build a better world for my child. I'm like, I need to keep my child away from the things, all the things. Like, no news. Like, it's going to be like my house is basically like goodbye Lenin.
Yeah.
Except rather than it being like the Soviet Union, it's just like my crazy fantasy land.
Yeah, no, you should raise. Oh, you've got a good crucifix there. You should raise your child in a kind of trad bubble, so that they think it's permanently about like. Oh God, I was about to say about 1940, but then the liberals think they permanently live in 1940. They're obsessed with the idea they're constantly refighting the Second World War. So but just a kind of like an idyllic, fake kind of false time.
Well,
Like a sort of like Stepford Wives, but it kind of
well,
harks
do you know
back to
what?
the pre-modern period.
That would be a gift. And I'll
Mm,
tell you why. Because it would give my child something to rebel against.
that's true.
That's the problem, is like everything is so bloody permissive, right? There's no taboos left to be broken, right? I mean, I think that beginning of the end was really when Owen Jones wrote that article about wanking at work about 10 years ago. And since then, there's just been this like domino of like, I don't know, like all the stuff around like kink and like people talk. Oh God, I mean, even speaking about it revolts me. I just think people should keep private things private. Just keep private things private.
Absolutely. I mean, I've
You know
gotten
what I
to
mean?
the point where I believe in the separation of the public and private sphere. I think that
Of
the
course.
the feminist critique of the division of the world into public and private spheres, the problem is it falls down if you try and meld these two things together. It's like everything the left does, right? Its next project for cultural revolution is always either absorbed or preempted by capitalism. It creates your fantasy. So, for example, the sexual revolution, right? It creates your society of permissive sexual relationships, sex before, during, and after marriage, as many partners as you want. The idea that sexual relations in themselves are a form of liberation. At one point, this was the big idea of a part of the kind of psychoanalytic
Yeah.
tradition, Wilhelm Reich and all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, capitalism introduces it, and what a surprise! It turns out to be extremely alienated and alienating.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, I think that this is most obvious with something like sex work or prostitution. That this is now being seen as like a viable career choice for young women. Um, like, and is promoted not just as a viable career choice, but as a liberated one. And
mm,
that's what really fucks me off about it, because it's not.
mm.
Right? I'll get pelleters for saying that. I have actually like beyond giving a shit about it, to be honest. Like, I'm very like in favor of like sex workers joining unions and all that stuff, but like, don't pretend to me that sex work is somehow like a liberated idea for women, men, whoever, right? It doesn't really matter who it's for. It's not. And it's not the same as working in a dead end office job either. It's not the same thing.
No.
Um, it's deeply alienating and very like psychologically damaging. Um,
No, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? People will say, because there is a lobby of people who will say, yeah, we know it's alienating. It's labor. Labor's alienating. Yeah, but
but
it's
yeah,
not the same,
but that's
right?
like the Sylvia Federici position. So
Mm.
like I went to a lecture by her maybe about, I think it was about 2018 or something, and she was asked about her position on sex work. And she was basically like, well, is it any worse than like selling your brain in a dead end job? And like,
Yeah,
to
of
be
course
honest,
it
there's
is.
part of me, I would rather just be honest on this pod, right? Because that's what the point of it is. There's part of me that doesn't want to talk about this because I know I'll get flack for it, right? Um, there's part of me that wants to be like, yeah, Silvio Federici's position is kind of right, because it's the easiest path to take, because it's the kind of like the hippest, trendiest. It's what like young people on the left, generally speaking, is the hegemonic one. Is the sex work is legitimate, liberated, viable work, right? In my heart of hearts, and with my intellectual brain fully engaged, that it doesn't compute. It's not the same thing. It's abuse. Do you know what I mean? It's not a legitimate form of work at all. It happens. Yeah, sex workers should be like unionized. I'm all for like protection and for sex workers to be part of the conversation. I don't even care about the term sex work. I'm not getting into yet another debate about language. But deep down I know that I can't stand by and kind of be like, yeah, yeah, cool. Like that's absolutely fine for young girls to aspire to be on OnlyFans and call it liberation. It doesn't make sense. The other thing that like I was getting at with this idea of like having something to rebel against is to do with like patriarchy. So I've seen it like quite a few times recently and in the current like some of the social circles that I like run in, people, talk about like the patriarchy and smashing the patriarchy. And increasingly I'm a little bit of the view that it's like, well, let's be honest, the patriarchy is quite fucked and has been for a very long time. I mean, name any major institution, major patriarchal institution that hasn't been absolutely rocked by crisis, like from the state, like right across the world, like but particularly the West, like trust in the state, and the church, the family, major global institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, like all of these major institutions have all been like rocked by major crises around like governance, like the police is another. Do you know what I mean? Like all of these patriarchal institutions are in crisis. The one that's most obvious to me is the family is in crisis, but it's still held up as some sort of like that's where the battleground is for a lot of feminists.
But do you
And
know?
I completely reject that.
Do you know how people would respond to that though? They would say, I mean, you're already saying patriarchy is broken because its institutions don't represent the kind of hegemonic ideological power in society they once did. But the way so much thought on the radical left, or the putatively radical left, goes now is all of these things, patriarchy, capitalism, much else besides, they're just in the ether. They're not attached to institutions. They're like a world spirit, right? So
Vibe.
yeah,
It's
so
the politics of vibes.
yeah, it's vibes. It's like this stuff is like magic. It's in the air. So and that's how it's like that's why there's this kind of obsession with the idea that it goes on all the way from a micro to a macro level, right? So so there was a completely moronic controversy, one of these social media confections about men staring at women in the gym, right? So it goes all the way from a man looking at a woman in the gym to the fact that most CEOs are men, or maybe not so much these days. He's quite a lot of feminists like war now, but there once would have been a critique that men dominate things like the arms industry and militarism and so on. That to people on the left is a very seductive idea. This idea of our real enemies are sort of like a spiritual force, right? It's like a new idealism on a certain level. And it's superficially, because it's abstract, people think it's intellectual, they think it's smart. But really, it's a defense mechanism. It's because if you try and pin people down to material facts, the material relations of society and the material institutions of society could disprove their argument, or at the very least, it would, if you were to take society from the Profumo affair to today, just take British society from then to now, you could measure the decline of what people are calling patriarchy, and they don't want you to measure it, right?
Yeah.
Because that disrupts a certain that disrupts the left's ability to keep its analysis of society in a kind of stasis, like it's unchanging, right? Loads of people think that you can take insights from the Combahee River Collective, right, from the early 1970s, and apply them in 2023. despite
Yeah.
the fact that in Scotland, between those two periods, for major institutions like, for example, the church, have disappeared,
Mm.
right? But once you start measuring real institutions and real social life, the idea that there is an all-pervasive spirit of patriarchy surrounding us comes into question, and that there is
Yeah.
that question.
But this is a very similar problem when it comes to discussions of race as well.
Mm.
Like the idea that you can export the American, like, kind of Afro pessimism of Black Lives Matter to a place like Scotland, where, yes, there is racism, but our society is fundamentally built on a different type of racism. There's different component parts, but people just, it's this kind of like politics of vibe that's the current thing that's happening. So that's the current thing we're talking about. Um,
This
yeah.
very day, someone said to me, I sort of, I saw this stuff about Kate Forbes, who is one of the, putative challengers to be the next First Minister.
First predicted on this podcast, I would say.
Oh, that's true, years ago.
Elect the elect.
Elect the elect. I already came up with the slogan for the Calvinist campaign. But I read an article in the Guardian about, can she sneak her socially conservative attitudes into high office and so on? And I just did this tweet where I said, like, she doesn't want to turn Scotland into Gilead, right? She is a member, she's a careerist in a liberal political party. She keeps her religious views relatively low profile, except when she's talking about them in a very kind of personal profile sort of way. She doesn't thrust them into politics, and very few religious politicians do anymore. They kind of park God at the door, and then they go into the chamber, right? But as soon as I said this, people were like, don't you understand that there's a conspiracy all the way from the United States to Westminster and now to Holyrood to unwind queer people and women's rights and all this kind of stuff? I do not believe in this conspiracy.
I
Like,
don't either.
I don't think that exists. I don't think that the human material for a meaningful either religious or secular conservative movement exists in Scotland. I mean, I did say sort of, a spectre is haunting Scotland, the spectre of, social conservatism. And a bit like in that opening, section of the Communist Manifesto, Marx starts by saying, there are a lot more people flaking out about communists and communism and claiming who they are and what they want than there are communists. You know what I mean? And people and communists talking about what it is that they actually want. In much the same way, like, there's this permanent animating fear of a social conservative monster who doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Permanent fear. The idea that, and this is what I saw people saying, is she's going to overturn equal marriage and abortion rights.
Not a chance. Not a fucking chance in hell. She's she's going to be the leader of like a bourgeois, like middle class party in Scotland. I mean, it's not. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, see, if she tried that, she'd be out on her ass faster than Liz Truss was. It's that level of, just completely breaking the rules of the social order.
Yeah.
The rules of the social order would not permit something like that to happen. But that should tell you something about the nature of that social order, and it should tell you that the tools you're using to analyze capitalism, do you know what I mean? Like, there seems to be quite a lot of people who think that, like, capitalist ideology is like Andrew Tate, as though he wouldn't be regarded by someone.
No, Andrew Tate is literally a symptom of the crisis in patriarchy.
Of course he is.
Like, actual patriarchs don't fucking look and behave like Andrew Tate.
No, he's
actual patriarchs don't put pictures of themselves fucking half naked on the internet. Like, I'm sorry, but this guy is just he's just a sado.
This is the thing. He's the cast off. Do you know what he's like?
Dregs, man.
He's like a like a parody. It's like someone's mocking manhood.
Yeah,
right? It's like someone's mocking the image of manhood that might have been a reality in about 1910, right? They're saying like, what is it to be a man? It's to be kind of like, but I mean, can you imagine? Yeah, as you're saying, like a real patriarch, right? Like, I don't know, a tycoon in the 19th century going around calling women bitches with stripped to the waist,
Oiled up, bald.
oiled up, like
I saw the editor of the internet blog Bella Caledonia do a sort of conspiracy theory post on this where he like posted three pictures, and one was like Andrew Tate, one was like of Right Said Fred, and one was of like Putin shirtless and like with a shaved head, as
wait
if
a minute,
this was like
was he claiming that there's a relationship between the baldness and the shirtlessness?
I
And,
think he was claiming that there was a relationship between reactionary politics, baldness, and shirtlessness.
okay. Well, I mean, it's a take.
It's a take. I mean, it's not as good as my Ukraine take, which I am absolutely pumped to give you.
Right, go on.
Are you sure you want to hear this? Because this is the genuinely the maddest fucking chat I've had in ages.
Go on.
So I think that people are so like keen on Ukraine, especially the boomers, right? Because they have already spent like 5 or 10 years or whatever being subliminally exposed to Ukrainian propaganda through minions because they're the same color as the Ukrainian flag. And everybody knows that boomers love minions.
That
And I think if you
that is certainly a baby brain take. So
that's like I was genuinely sitting on the couch thinking about minions.
so
Yeah.
you're in your mind, they've got like, I know what you mean, like it's kind of like a boomer will send you like memes of those minion
Minions, yeah.
and like you can imagine kind of like wine o'clock minions arriving.
Yeah, yeah, 9 o'clock minions and like, do you know what I mean? Minions
If
doing cheeky stuff.
someone if
This was my
someone
big fear about like becoming a mother was that I would suddenly start sending minions memes.
well, this is the thing. I mean, do you sometimes receive minions memes alongside like weird shit about Zelensky? Because there's a lot of that as well. There's a lot of
No,
like, Zelensky thirst.
but I'll tell you what,
WhatsApp
right? See,
messages.
see on Mumsnet, right?
Hmm.
Like on Mumsnet, they all love Zelensky. I mean, they're all like wet for Zelensky. So like that's disgusting. They all love Zelensky, and they all love minions,
Hmm.
right? So like the Venn diagram is a circle.
Yeah.
So I think that my theory has I think it's got better like bald and shirtless does.
Um, I'm just trying to think about when the minions. Hang on, what were the minions in?
Hello?
Mm,
Oh hi,
I can
you're
hear.
back.
I was just gonna say, what were the minions from? Because I
I
know
don't know.
I think it was some kind of Disney Pixar thing. But what I'm gonna
It
suggest,
was.
what I'm gonna suggest is if a listener can go back and look up whatever Disney Pixar film that was and see if it came out around about the time of the Maidan movement, right? And that will be definitive proof that the minions were disseminated into Western society, as you say, to plant the seeds for hysteria over the war among the wine at 6 p.m. Brigade. Um, so what? And I'm going to lay down a challenge as well and say, is that not at least as good as the claim that baldness and shirtlessness are a masculinist ploy for supporting the Russian side in the war? I should say, by the way, that the idea that there is a titanic struggle between masculine and feminine energies in this present war, you might think that sounds like something Jordan Peterson would say, but that's the official position of a campaign called Another Europe is Possible, which you may remember was a kind of leftist front for the People's Vote campaign. They signed a statement that said that the struggle in Ukraine was a struggle for kind of like feminine or like femme liberation against toxic masculinity,
Yeah, yeah, I
as
know.
represented by Putin and his bald head and chest.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you may think we're sort of talking a load of crap here, but it's at least as intelligent as much that is being said in the public sphere at present.
Yeah, I mean, I just did a quick I just did a quick Google search of Ukrainian minions, right?
Mm.
And like there's a story on the internet about how yeah, the Ukrainians have dressed a bomb up as a minion.
Oh my Christ alive! They've adopted this as a symbol.
I don't know. I mean, I cannot verify that this is from a reliable news source, but exactly, and that's why I share my insane conspiracy theories because the idea that the Ukrainian resistance is somehow like a blow to Putin's deadly like patriarchal values is fucking stupid.
It's mad. The war in Ukraine is as sad and tragic a war as has ever taken place.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
trying to project various fantasies onto it of, like this is going to be some kind of breakthrough for left-wing politics, or it'll be good for the world if like Russia collapses or something. It's just completely mental. This is very much, I mean, uh, it's a very strange thing that All Quiet on the Western Front is, being kind of lauded at the Oscars. And the compartmentalization of people's minds to, on the one hand, be like, God, isn't war hell? You know what I mean? That film that really delivers an emotional punch and says, wasting young men's lives in wars for kind of European hegemony and land and geostrategy. It's outrageous. But in
yeah,
the very next sentence, the present analogous war, and it is quite analogous in many ways to the First World War, except for scale, right now at least. Who knows? We'll see. In the very next breath, it's, oh no, but the version of that that's going on right now really is noble. Like it really is glorious. Nadia Whittam MP says it's glorious. She uses that phrase. She says glory to Ukraine. What glory? I mean, it's disgusting. How can
yeah,
anyone call hundreds of thousands of people being churned into mud, which is what's going on in eastern Ukraine right now, glorious? It's
yeah.
just it's
It's
maddening.
sick.
And it just shows you that people can absorb those kind of like those polite kind of official mainstream anti-war opinions. You can absorb them at such a superficial level, that you can hold them. That there are people, who would, the next time there's Poppy Day, they'll be like, oh, Poppy Day, horrible, celebrating war, and they'll be sharing on social media all the kind of World War One poems and stuff like that. And these same people will support the present war.
Yeah.
I should say, but I like it that we've already. It shows you what happens if there's 3 months without a ConterCast. We have just exploded a spatter of of demented ConterCast patter on here. We've already moved through the sexual revolution, minions, war, Kate Forbes, Calvinism. It's like a greatest hits. It's kind of like when old bands tour and they do medleys of their songs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a mega mix.
This is a mega mix.
A
Like
ConterCast mega mix.
like the crowd should be loving this.
Oh, hey, this reminds me, right? So I went to an event between the last ConterCast and this one. It was a spoken word event. I mean, not my bag, but I went with a very dear friend of mine. And it was at King Tut's, and I was standing outside, chatting to Scottish celebrity Darren McGarvey.
Mm.
And we're standing outside chatting, and a guy came up to me and was like, "Oh my God, I love your podcast. Can you sign my tits?"
Right. Okay.
His name, I think, was Auden. And then he said, "No, my real name's Angus, but I call myself Auden." I don't really know. I was
Sounds like one of our listeners.
unhinged yet wholesome.
Mm.
That's our listening base. Yeah, so I was like, oh, on the next pod, I definitely will give him a shout out. And then he said, he was like, the thing I love about your pod is that it's so shambolic. It's
Mm.
like it takes about 50 minutes to get to the actual bit.
Did you sign his teat?
No, I didn't. I
Oh,
didn't. I assumed he was speaking sort of like poetically.
okay.
I think that he meant like, oh gosh, I want you to sign my tits.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Like kind of, do you know what I mean? I didn't then like fucking whip out a biro
Yeah, yeah.
and write Boydie on his chest. As much as I would love to do that.
Okay, so Oran, also known as Angus, thanks for listening and thanks for noting the shambles.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, let's hang on. The meat and potatoes of this episode, though, must be Sturgo has gone.
Yeah.
Were you shocked, surprised?
No, I was, do you know, this is the second time this in my life this has happened. That I've been napping whilst like the big thing has happened, right? So the first time this happened was on my way back from Cuba, at the EU referendum, and James Foley woke me up like shaking me awake because I was pumped full of Valium, was shaking me awake, going, "Fucking Brexit's happened, right?" Delighted. Same thing happened, apart from like, I'm just having a nap on the sofa with the baby, not pumped full of Valium, and James Foley is shaking me awake, going, "Sturgeon's resigned! Sturgeon's resigned!" Like, it really gave me flashbacks to that moment. And frankly, I have never seen my husband happier for a long time.
I,
Really delighting in the moment. Um, yeah, I mean,
I'm
I
I'm
wasn't, I
annoyed.
wasn't surprised. I was just sort of like, it felt a bit. I mean, we've said that she's gonna go for a long time. Like, I honestly think that she's using this as a bit of an opportunity to construct a particular. I think she knows that she had to go. I reckon it's probably something to do with the money. I think there are big questions being asked about the SNP finances, the money that was loaned from Peter Murrow. Like, there's an ongoing police investigation, etc., etc. I think that might get a bit hot, maybe not, who knows. But also, to be honest with you, see, going round about this time when all of the fallout of the GRR is happening, what that allows you to do is it allows her supporters to run a Nicola was too good for Scotland, you see.
Mhm.
I mean, this country's still too backwards. It's still trapped by the reactionary like views of conservatism, blah blah blah. It allows your supporters to run that story. You don't have to say that. And let's be honest, we've already seen on social media lots of people giving out hot takes that the reason she's resigning is over like, how the press have harassed her over the GRR and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
I
principally
think
because she's
I
a
think it's
woman.
nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that she's a woman and that somehow she's a victim. I mean, I fucking hate Thatcher, but at least she just got on with being an evil wee bastard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm almost kind of annoyed I predicted it because, but because then everyone says they predicted it, and anyone and if you say it, you sound like you predicted it. But quite unusually, we did. For commentators in Scotland, we did predict it. Though I wasn't expecting it to come quite when it did. But one thing I had been thinking, and one thing I actually wrote in an article for Conter was, the longer she leaves this, the less well she can go. And honestly, I think if she'd left this a month or 2 months, it would look much worse. So she did the smart thing. I mean, she's nothing if not canny with this kind of stuff. I'll tell you something else as well. She told no one.
Yeah.
Angus Robertson was out of the country, was on holiday in Antigua, right? And it just what
Yeah,
made
actually,
aye.
that's
So
fucking
if he had heard a sniff of a rumor around this, he wouldn't have gone, right? But that shows you, by the way, how Sturgeon ran her internal operation. It tells you so much. Remember, her top ministers had no idea about the de facto ref policy, not before she announced it to the world, even after she announced it to the world. Some of our top ministers were caught in radio interviews and basically had it explained to them by the journalists, right? Sturgeon has been running the SNP this way. She never tells her team what's going on because that way she can control the news cycle entirely herself. It tells you a lot about politics. I mean, all the crap people are talking about, how compassionate she is and all this kind of stuff, right? She's a player through and through and through.
Yeah, this is what fucks me off, right? I actually think that this is I think that this is a type of flip side of sexism, right? All this like, compassionate politician. No, Nicola Sturgeon is calculating. She is calculating, she is controlling. As you said, she dominated the news cycles, like controlled everything incredibly tightly. Like, at least if you're gonna like do a gush, do it on that. Do it on the fact that her and her husband ran the dominant party of the country. Do you know what I mean? Not that she was like, oh, so, down to earth and like compassionate and always had like, real care and tenderness. Like, I would fucking hate for people to talk about me like that.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you
I'm
that.
dead. I want people to be like, Kat was mean, but very, very, very good at it.
Well, this is the thing, right? I think there's a little bit of this, just a little bit, because most of it's just people, for want of a better phrase, virtue signaling or, signaling to their kind of professional credentials as one of the insiders and so on, right? But I think there is a little bit of this, which is it's self-serving on a kind of ego level, because if you say about Nicola Sturgeon, some of the pants articles out there are absolutely
Oh,
embarrassing, right?
honestly, I read one in the Herald today that made me want to blow my brains out.
It's people saying things like,
Criminal.
she might not have been that radical, but she did X, Y, and Z quite well, and so on. It's like, you know what I mean? She may not have lived up, it's more like she may not have lived up to her radical dreams. She doesn't have any fucking radical dreams. Shut the fuck up. This idea that she's a lefty who fell short is ridiculous, right?
It's honestly, I mean, I keep going back to this in my head about, when like Thatcher is quoted as saying like her greatest legacy is Tony Blair.
Aye, that's a top. That's a top
I think of like Sturgeon's greatest legacy is the fact that Anna Sarwar is now playing Things Can Only Get Fucking Better outside the Glasgow City Chambers.
Yeah.
Like, Scotland has been we are now trapped in stasis. Like, that is her legacy.
Sturgeon has reintroduced neoliberalism into public life in Scotland. I mean, she's given it a kind of second birth. But my point is this. See, when I would, it's much truer to say the following, right? I'll say this for Sturgeon. If I was going to say one thing for Sturgeon, right? She absolutely done us up like a fucking kipper, right? That's the truth, right? And that, by the way, is the non-patronizing thing to say.
Yeah.
You can't take away from Sturgeon the fact that she fucking done us. And if you're, particularly by the way, if you're in the independence movement, she fucking did you.
You got shafted.
You got shafted so hard.
With a foam finger.
With a foam finger. She took the pot of money and she ran, right? Perhaps literally, perhaps not. No, fuck that, right? Don't want to get sued, but
allegedly.
Allegedly, there's things to be said about the financial affairs of the SNP. But what I'm saying is, be honest, right? Give the devil her due. She absolutely fucked us over.
Holy man.
The independence movement in particular, right? Giving her due is not saying, have you heard this line? And the only reason it's going around is because she said it at her own press conference that her priority was women and children. That is the most, it is craven. How can people say that, man? How can people say that stuff? Right? I mean, her priority was women and children. Yeah, and apple pie and mother love. Those were her other her other achievements were like being nice to kittens. I mean, for God's sake, right? No, her achievement was
drowned the independence movement like a helpless fucking runt.
Yes, right? She picked it up by the hind legs and smacked its fucking brains out on a
Left it by the side of a motorway in a bin bag.
covered in piss, right? And she could do that because she had real qualities. What were those qualities? Ruthlessness,
Yes.
calculation,
Yes.
single-mindedness.
Yes. But see, this is, and that's actually, in my opinion, I think that's what it takes to be a politician. I think
You're
that's what it
absolutely right.
like a political actor. Too many of today's politicians are so thin-skinned. It is unbelievable. And Sturgeon wasn't like that. Do you know what I mean? Like when I was running for Rise, man, I was a complete basket case. Complete basket case.
So I was like, but I know what you're saying.
Remember it. You remember it, right? Because like everything that happened with like that campaign, I took it all really personally when we got criticized. Because I'm not cut out for that type of politics. Like I'm not evil and ruthless and calculating and all that stuff. Like I'm a big dumb kitten. Like that's, do you know what I mean? Like, and I like to think about politics and talk about it and do it where I can, but I'm not up for the sharp elbowed climb the greasy ladder, like all that stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think you have to like be a certain person, and that should be respected. But today's politicians are so thin-skinned; they take loads of stuff personally, and at least Sturgeon didn't really appear to do that.
She didn't. She never took it personally. She knew. She had that mind, right? I mean, I don't want to say. I mean, maybe if sociopaths are on a spectrum, right? Then she had a touch of it. She had a little pinch of it, right? Because she had that instinct, and most people don't have it. I don't have it, right? This thing of just that ruthlessness, that thing where you feel completely emotionally insulated from your own actions. And some of it is grim, by the way. Like some of it is vile. I mean, what people euphemistically call her failings, some of them involve large numbers of people dying,
I
right?
know, I know.
Now,
I tweeted this because I'm like fucking sick of this rewriting of history. Like I hate when this happens, when a politician or like a political leader resigns and then like history is very quickly rewritten. You know, it happened with the Queen as well. I mean, it happened when Thatcher died. Like, you know, it'll happen. I think it's one of the lasting successes of the anti-war movement that Blair will. It's very difficult to rehabilitate him because no matter what he does, it will always haunt him. And I think that's one of the successes of Stop the War. But under Sturgeon's government, that COVID care home crisis happened.
no, absolutely.
Nobody was held accountable for it, David.
And this
And
is how you,
I retweeted something that Neil Finlay tweeted yonks ago the other day just to be like, still happened.
it still happened. No amount of talk about women and children can make it go away. And as you were saying, you know, I'm not. If I was responsible for what happened in Scotland's care homes, and as soon as I'd found out about it, I would have been at the podium, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's little press podium at the time, and I would say, I'm resigning, and I'm filled with remorse and shame. And then I would assign myself into some sort of rehab center and said, sort of like, you know what I mean? It will be a gain for me at this point if I come out of this situation alive, right? That's what would have happened to me if I had presided over just one of the complete catastrophes that took place during Nicola Sturgeon's tenure. Now, maybe
This is a woman who led the SNP and could not, in her time of leadership, secure a commitment to another referendum. I mean, it's baffling that people think she did a good job.
yeah,
And it fascinates me that support for her continues to be coded as left wing. Whereas it really wasn't that long ago that Kate Forbes delivered a budget that was like slash slash slash. That was our spending review.
It's so
Like,
bizarre being on the left and trying to be meaningfully like a socialist today. And what you see is identical policies emerging from the supposedly left wing of official politics and the supposedly right wing, which is kind of like, it's not, I mean, do you know what I mean? Like the Tory party is a liberal party. But in any case, from this blob emerges a very similar body of politics. And yes, as you say, coding them radically differently. people investing so heavily in
Yeah.
that coding. The pandemic's perhaps the arch example, because the record of the pandemic in Scotland and England was almost identical, and
Yeah.
yet it's a real public belief that there was a huge difference between
Yeah.
how those two things were handled. It was the same. It was exactly. It was just exactly
Yeah.
the same. So yeah, and then I mean, the thing about independence is just everything that you could have done to undermine the independence movement in Scotland after 2014 was done, making it utterly implausible that this wasn't a conscious, calculated, continuous effort. I always thought one day Nicola Sturgeon will appear at the head of one of those independence marches, right? Even if she had, I would still have said deliberately not doing so for years was a deliberate ploy
Yeah.
to demobilize the movement, to kind of dampen it, to leave it without political leadership, and to disorientate it and so on. But one of the things that's happened now that she's left in the way she has is it will never happen. So it never happened. She never went on a single pro-independence march after the 2016 her unveiling of IndieRef 2 from start to finish. That was a money and data mining operation, and an operation to run down any potentially autonomous nodes within the wider social movement, right? To just remind people how utterly cynical this was. The SNP in 2016, they announced independence referendums on numerous occasions, far too numerous to number here. But two of the most cynical were immediately after Brexit, when a campaign was launched called Ref.Scot, that is referendum. On very close inspection, you could see it was an SNP front, right? It raised tens of thousands of pounds, and then was suddenly shut down because the SNP launched their own fundraiser for the 2017 general election. Then there was a second, or rather, a second relaunch, a second IndieRef 2 in 2019. This one was called Yes, right? And was designed so it looked like a cross-party campaign. I should tell you, by the way, I didn't know this until relatively recently, but if I'm not wrong, that campaign presented itself as the successor to, among other campaigns, the Radical Independence Campaign, just so you know. So in its About Us section on Yes.Scot, it claimed to be, or at least came as close to claiming this, so that you couldn't, it wasn't actually said so that, no one could kick up a fuss. But it basically had this kind of long preamble about how this great movement came together in 2014, and now it's Yes.Scot, right? And it's the name Yes.Scot was all in kind of like party colors: red, blue, yellow, the Lib Dem orange, right?
Of the
So
Yes Alliance sort of vibe.
Yes Alliance. So you would look at this and that you would think this is a multi-party, all-party campaign, etc. It raised hundreds of thousands of pounds. Very much of it for people who weren't even in the SNP. Again, you'd have to rummage around in that website to find out that it was actually an SNP platform. And the only reason there's anything saying it is SNP is so that you don't donate above a certain level. If you're outside the UK, because of course it's going to a political party, so that's illegal, right? If you ever went on this website, it had all these kind of tabs you could click on for, like, where's your nearest event? Where's your nearest Yes.Scot event? There were never any events. This thing just sat there like a sort of internet-born turd, right? Not doing anything except raising money and getting people to send in their email addresses. The money raised from both of these campaigns disappeared. And there's still no accounting of where it is. Now, the official line at the moment, should be said, the police are currently investigating this situation. The official line at the moment is that this money has been, well, it's never been said out loud, but I don't know where else it could have gone except on routine party activity. But this money will be, it's ring-fenced in the minds of accountants, right? So it's an IOU. That money is now owed in some future independence referendum. I asked the SNP president, Mike Russell, about this, right? This was a couple of years ago, maybe. I said to him, I was in an interview for a different publication. I said to him, right, if it is an IOU, then the only way you can recuperate those monies is by holding a fundraiser specifically for the SNP, right? So the SNP then recoups that £600,000 to its accounts, and you tell everyone that it's for the SNP, and then you transfer that into a non-SNP, or sorry, into an SNP independence campaign for an independence campaign, right? So you transfer explicitly SNP raised monies into the explicitly independence campaigning pot, right, for an actual referendum campaign. He said yes to that. So officially, according to the SNP president, the plan is to lie to people, right, to raise money for the SNP for non-independence campaigning activities, and then transfer that money. So the only way to get out of this now, not just according to me, but to the SNP president, is to do more lying, is to lie to people in more fundraisers. I have no idea how they're going to get out of that situation, because that's nonsense. That's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. Yes. So news that Sturgeon is, that the police are investigating this. And also news, of course, that emerged last year that party chief executive and Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, made a loan of £107,000 to the party, which very much makes it sound like the party's in severe financial difficulties. According to the Sun, there's a possibility police are now investigating that as well. And that came out 48 hours before Sturgeon suddenly quit.
Yeah.
Not saying there's a connection between those things. We'll have to wait and see. It's testimony to how off the rails things went in the last few months.
Yeah.
That is only one of the things that may have prompted this early exit.
Of all the things. I think that that Sturgeon's legacy, if you like, and like heart failures in office I think that there is probably going to be quite a significant lag before we really understand what happens between the kind of the post-referendum surge in like support and membership, and I'm with Nicola, and like that, becoming like what the biggest social democratic party in Europe, with it like in days, like membership, like what, multiplied by 5, 6, 7 times, like after the referendum loss. And a lot of those voters coming from like the Labour heartlands, like those working class constituencies that voted yes. Places like Lanarkshire, Glasgow, like places like Dundee. And now I suspect that lots of people have left the party, not in a kind of like, I'm writing an angry letter, resigning my party membership over X, Y, or Z. X, Y, or Z being like, the indie ref money, or the failures on education, or the GRR, or whatever like that. I don't think that that's what's happened. I think people have just like let their membership lapse. Or they've just like cancelled their subs. And what then happens to people who, really like bought into the cult of Sturgeon? Because nobody who's going to, come after her is going to like have that same moment. The circumstances are entirely different. The candidates are all entirely different, but all the same. And I just wonder, like, what impact is that actually going to have on politics in Scotland, where you have, a whole generation of people who will always feel betrayed by the Labour Party. And then you have this other group of people who felt that they had agency for the first time in their lives in 2014 joined the SNP because that, like, independence was the thing, and then slowly watched as the party just ignored them too.
Mm.
And like, what happens in and I think there will be I think it'll be a big lag. Like, I think there'll be a lot of time that goes by before we actually see the fallout of it. But I don't think it'll be very pretty.
No, I don't think so. I think so I think there are two broad outcomes from this, because I've just seen, perhaps people have seen a poll that shows Scottish Labour winning the next general election in Scotland, right? And not by by seats anyway, not by vote count, but basically winning back all of the Labour heartlands that they lost after 2014. There are people who will look at that and quite foolishly and superficially say Labour Scotland's back. No, it's not, right? Instead, what you're going to have is whack-a-mole, people alternating between parties to whack the other one, right? Which is a symptom of class de-alignment. Basically,
Yeah.
after 2014, a block of working class votes shifted dramatically from from Labour to the SNP, partly in a bid to punish Labour, partly because they thought that they now had a project that could represent their interests. What's going to happen now is that block is going to transfer, at least in part, to Labour, just to punish the SNP, but with no hope that the Labour Party will somehow represent the interests of
Yeah.
working class people. Certainly not beyond kicking out the Tories, which is another part of the impetus for this. There's a mirror situation going on in England. Starmer becoming Prime Minister next year, if that's what happens, will not represent a meaningful resurrection of like social democracy in Britain or something. It's just that the Tories are now getting the whack-a-mole treatment,
Yeah.
right? So in 2019, there was a historic class-based shift away from Labour to punish the Labour Party and to secure Brexit, at least in for some voters. Actually, some of those voters went from Labour to Tory. A lot more just fell away, right? Now there's going to be a migration back to Labour to punish the Tories, but that does not invest anything in Starmer's project in England. So we're witnessing an acceleration of the class de-alignment of politics, the hollowing out of public life, and a continuing fall in expectations in politics. There are no expectations anymore that any of these politicians will deliver anything good for people. And that's because really no politician has this side of the millennium, right? And perhaps longer. That's a toxic situation. It's very dangerous. And all those people who I remember around the time of like Brexit and Trump and stuff, there was this hullabaloo on the kind of centre left and sort of the Guardian and the New Statesman and Open Democracy and stuff, people saying, quite rightly, well, don't just shriek about things like Trumpism. This is what happens when people lose faith in public life, right? And then, of course, as soon as Trump's out of office and as soon as Boris Johnson's gone and so on, the old complacency just comes right back in. And people are like, oh, isn't Sturgeon wonderful in the pages of these same publications? You are storing up so many problems for the future. Yeah. I'm not saying this will happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a right-wing backlash in Scotland.
Yeah. I think it's been ticking for a long time.
We're not immune to the moods and on the continent. And our great problem, and this is kind of why we started doing Conter and stuff, is the left is associated with neoliberalism in Scotland, deeply associated. And there's no way to break that association.
That's why you can quite easily talk about being a socialist and loving Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes, and I would say,
and nobody bats an eyelid.
Most people,
or Greens talk about being socialists. That I'm a socialist and a Green, and I'm like, look at like this stuff that you've backed, like these cuts to public spending. Do you know what I mean? The cuts to the NHS, and they are cuts, right? And this is the problem, is like sometimes like the criticisms have elements of truth. And I know how the budget works. Don't anybody send me fucking tweets saying, don't you know how the Scottish budget works? Like, do you know what I mean? I know how this works, but the reality is that certain groups of workers, ordinary people, pay the price time and time again.
Yeah.
And when the executioner is different, it's gone from Labour to the SNP to the SNP and the Greens. I don't think that people will forget that. And there's not a lot of other places for people's energy to go. I also think people are really sickened by the culture war. Like, honestly, I can't take it anymore. Like, I want Twitter to die. I don't want to like be involved in any culture war politics. I think people are utterly fucking ghoulish
Mm.
um around like all these issues. I think that people use tragedies to like further their own agendas all the time. I think it's all awful. And like we've been on the left, I mean, we've been on the left for a long time. We've been dealing with what are essentially culture war issues for about 15 years,
Yeah.
right? We started discussing things like gender identity and cis and trans and all that about 15 years ago.
I think people don't understand this because it's like,
Right. So
yeah,
like basically, and to be honest, it is. I heard someone describing it as like luxury ideology. It is because it comes from a very academic background, very university campus background. Like it is the language of the academy, the way that the debate is going. And what's happened is that has been propelled into the mainstream. And there's people across Scotland going, hang on, what are you talking about?
mm.
And we've had 15 years of like discussion and debate about these concepts. Um, and suddenly, people in bits of Scotland that have, never had the luxury of like, sitting about talking and thinking about these things are going, wait, what's just happened?
Well, this is, do you know what the GRR in particular made me think about the kind of political geography of modern democracy is when the democratic system was developing in Britain, so in the 19th century, when you had agitation for reform and so on, what it generally looked like was in England, for example, but this is exactly just as true in Scotland, like in England, for example, and there'd be agitation in the North and Midlands, right? And, in the docks of cities and in the coal fields and in the industrial sectors and in the weaving centers, that was where a lot of the kind of agitation, political agitation was going on. And then that would reach such a peak that it would migrate from the North and Midlands to London, right? And suddenly there'd be mobs of tens of thousands of working class people outside the Houses of Commons and the House of Lords, right? And the politicians would have to, and they'd present a petition or something. It wasn't fully formed class consciousness, so people weren't saying we're going to take power or whatever. They were just saying we've come to you with our grievances, address our grievances. That's where the whole tradition of protest politics come from. Literally, protest marches came from when a regional MP would organise a petition and say, "Follow me to the House of Commons to present the petition to the Commons." And when they see you walking behind me, they'll say, "Oh, there's a great strength of feeling behind this." So literally, the whole history of protest politics is this. It's the provincial areas petitioning the centre,
Yeah.
petitioning the centre of power. Right. Here's my question about the GRR, but I could pick many other forms of legislation in recent decades. Did they come from the regions? Did they come from the marginalized and excluded? Or did the process for this mostly happen in the other direction? Did the centre issue its demands to the periphery? Right? Did the centre change things and then go to the periphery and say, just so you know, we've made some changes, right?
This is what's happening now. And if you're not down with that, then you get left behind. Like that's the story of fucking Brexit. Like
Yeah,
that's what happened.
absolutely, absolutely. This is what politics looks like in the period of ruling the void, right?
Yeah.
That it's no longer the case that the provincial mass of the country geographically, but I'm obviously talking about populations as well, periodically asserts itself over the governing centre, right? Instead, you have a governing centre that operates that apart from anything else consciously seeks to exclude the periphery and occasionally doles out fait accompli right?
Yeah, that's because especially in Scotland, the way that has manifested is because it is a very small managerial class.
Absolutely,
They
absolutely.
act like managers. They act like administrators. Like
When
this is
Nicola,
what management is doing now. Here is the diktat. Like this is the way things are done now.
when Nicola Sturgeon came up with the GRR, and before her, Theresa May, right? Theresa May got
Yeah.
done in over it, right? This is not something that came from some sort of like major democratic convulsion in society. And my point here, by the way, is not to incriminate people who are, making a demand to people in the position of politics. I'm talking about what Nicola Sturgeon did. Nicola
Yeah.
Sturgeon said to herself, "This will be my equal marriage."
Yeah.
She was looking around for something that
An opportunity.
for an opportunity. It cost her no money. That's a big one. This thing has to cost me no fucking money.
It is free.
It's free. It's free. No one can disagree with it. That's what she would have thought at the time. That's how out of touch she was with any kind of wider democratic sphere. No one can disagree with it. It won't really change anything. Everyone will give me a pat on the back and say, "Aren't you a lovely, progressive, compassionate, cosmopolitan?" All the things people were saying about her anyway when she had to fucking flee, right? Um, and I'll walk out and I'll be the next Jacinda Ardern, and I'll be the next Clinton, I'll be the next Tony Blair, right? Because I put a little cap on my time in office of this kind of liberal progressive giveaway. Had she known that it would have caused the biggest internal ructions in her party in her entire period as first minister, she would never have touched it. She would never have touched it, right? And this, by the way, is what people get wrong about this situation on both sides of the culture war, because you have plenty of people who despise the GRR and the independence movement who say she's hell bent on it. She did this, right? Nicola Sturgeon doesn't give a fuck. Remember what we said about her splatting the independence moves, brains out on a rock and then pissing on it, right? She is a ruthless player.
Aye. Go back to our fucking comments on section 28. Get on the old way back machine.
She was ruthless during section 28 in making sure that conservative Scotland was still on side by making little nods and winks.
Little nods. Yeah.
Right? She was the one who did that, by the way, more,
I know.
She was the operator in that situation. And see if there were, what Nicola Sturgeon didn't understand was conservative Scotland has since retreated even further than during section 28. She probably didn't see the need to balance the GRR with, a conservative element in society. What she didn't understand is that in the intervening period, the liberal tradition, the broad liberal tradition who had supported Section 28 had split internally, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, she came across this like opposition that she had no idea was there lurking, right? Do you know what I mean? Like ready to put up an opposition to this stuff. So that's what happened here. There wasn't some kind of like civil rights movement type struggle between progress and reaction. That entire stage was
people want that narrative though. Everybody wants that fucking story.
They're desperate because, and part of it is just declining expectations in politics, because if you had a huge labor movement out on the streets winning things for a social majority, right? Winning increases in buying power and pay and decent pensions and public services, the things that everyone needs. If you had that, you wouldn't have people going around saying, like, we need to combine our economic demands with demands for social liberation, right? As though this was still, those kind of doctrines of the 1930s, right? Because what people have come accustomed to in a way is like, we're not winning anything on the class front. The class front has collapsed, right? But what we do have is this other stuff, which is also vital. And we've been winning that for decades. The left tells itself it's been winning it for decades. Neoliberalism hijacked much of that agenda decades ago. But I mean, I think people are desperate for there to be a kind of twilight struggle between social reaction and some kind of ill-defined social liberation that doesn't involve an engagement of like fundamental class questions. And that battle has taken place and the Liberals have won.
Yeah.
And it's made the Liberals very sad. There's nothing worse than your enemy dying.
This has truly been a mega mix ConterCast and finished on a classically depressing note.
Yeah.
There are other outlets available for hopeful content.
Yeah, no, if you want to hear about your much beloved cause being pissed on in a ditch, there's only one place you can come for that. Go back to the Guardian if you want to hear about
Yeah.
how Nicola Sturgeon is kind to old people and children.
Oh, sick. Absolutely sick. Um anyway, I'm gonna go back to my family role, back to the time portal.
Good stuff.
And we will record again soon.
Let's do it.
Excellent. See you later.
Bye.